For those of you who don't know me, I'm not actually a rampant egomaniac. The reason I've come up again is I just happened to have done a presentation on EU GDPR and I thought it was topical and I thought it might be of use to the meeting. This is cut down from a 1 hour presentation. I'm going to see how much of it I can get through in 10 minutes because this is a key area for us all to be aware of. For those of us who work in information governance, there isn't really a shortcut to going and reading the thing. It's 200 pages at the moment, but the first half of it at least is preamble, it's the interpretive text. It's not the final text yet. It's substantively what we know will be going to the European Parliament, although there'll still be some tidying on the precise terminology and the clause numbering and things like that. So there's enough there for us to know that this is what the law is going to look like across Europe. As Kenny mentioned earlier on, this replaces the directive, which is put into law by domestic legislation. The regulation applies across the whole of Europe. Up to a point. It's not got the consistency we were expecting because, as Kenny mentioned, the regulators, ICO in our instance, will have some scope to provide guidance. Also, there will be elements of it where there will be some local national legislation. The scope extends to cover organisations that are outside Europe. Insofar as they are processing data relating to European citizens, they'll be caught by the new regulation. And if they don't have a base in Europe, they'll be expected to appoint someone who is their representative. Subject rights expand a little bit. Certainly as the regulation stands, subject access requests will be free of charge, so expect an upturn both because of that and because of heightened awareness. There's a new right of erasure, which I think is maybe higher in the public expectation than the reality is. Certainly insofar as you're delivering a public service, there won't be an automatic right of people to have their personal records expunged, but people will be aware of these rights. And there's a new right of data portability as well, that you can take your personal data from one service provider, easily lift it, take it to another. We'll see. Some new definitions in there. Pseudonymisation is brought in as a concept, as a potential control for dealing with personal data, but protecting it from unnecessary identification. Genetic and biometric data is explicitly brought into the context of personal data. It goes on a lot about profiling. Regulation obsesses about profiling, and I think clearly one of the major targets of the regulation are those internet-based, is the targeted advertising industry. Principles shrink from 8 to 6, broadly covering the same areas. From a records management point of view, it's interesting to see the way that Principle 5 changes from the current principle that says personal data retained no longer than necessary to personal data is kept in a form that permits identification no longer than necessary. So potentially a shift there away from destruction of data to anonymisation. Conditions, a little bit more detail on what we mean by consent. It has to be unambiguous, so moving away from explicit to unambiguous. There is already a Article 29 Working Party definition of unambiguous. We'll see if that's what they go with. Legitimate interests stays there as grounds for processing in Schedule 2, but it has to be within the reasonable expectations of the data subjects. How am I doing for time? We won't have to notify, there won't be a register of data controllers anymore. So bang goes ICO's 500 quid or 35 quid, so they'll have to find another way of doing that. But the documentation parallel to the regulation, to the register, falls back at us. Every data controller and data processor will have to maintain a suite of documents identifying what we're processing, what we're doing with it, etc. And interesting that that duty falls to the data processor as well. privacy notices are going to have to be a lot more detailed and explicit in future than they have been up to now. I think one of our big tasks will be rewriting our privacy notices to meet the new regulation and being much more explicit in what we say to our data processors. There is mandatory, it's mandated to report data breaches. That 5 minutes? Oh, plenty of time. Actually, less than 5 minutes. We have 72 hours within which to report data breach to the Information Commissioner, unless we are confident that it's unlikely to cause any significant breach of privacy. We may also have to mandatorily report to data subjects as well. In the public sector, we already have generally policies of mandatory reporting, but having that in statute is stronger. More emphasis on privacy by design, privacy by default, so that when business processes and systems are designed, privacy is built from the ground up, and mandatory privacy impact assessments for any business activities that are likely to have a privacy impact. Data protection officer is mandated for all public authorities and for any business that's undertaking large-scale processing of sensitive personal data. What large-scale means, we don't know yet. That's one of the things we're waiting to have clarified. But the data protection officer role can be contracted out. They have to report to senior management, have to be expert, and interesting that becomes a statutory role. So it's the regulation will be supported by various codes of conduct listed there. There will be certification processes as well as a privacy badge. Data processors as well as data controllers are in the frame for any legal action, enforcement action, and probably the things that have caught the headlines is that for breaches of certain articles of the regulation, you can be fined up to €10 million, or 2% of global turnover. But the biggies, these ones, your fine can be up to €20 million, or 4% of global turnover. So that should be adequate to catch the attention of senior management, and I'll skip my last few.